Welcome to Life Imitating Movies, a weekly podcast show where myself, Mitch, and my co-host Brad, we talk about news stories from across the internet from the past week and the movies that we think have already been made that resemble these real-life stories. So let's just get right into it. We'll start things off on a little bit of a somber note here. Obviously, the biggest stories of the past week were the shootings in the Boulder, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia areas. And while we won't cover them on this show because it's a little bit of a politically charged story and things that are obviously very sensitive topics. So there are other shows that probably do more justice to covering those events. So we will certainly acknowledge them and we certainly wish the best for the communities and the families involved. But we're going to cover some different stories from the past week and kind of pay tribute to those incidents, but not discuss them at length here. So, with that, let's move on to our question of the week, kind of changing things up a little bit lighter. So, the question I posed as the host of this week: what movie would you want to watch for the first time again? You know, that first time that you see a movie and you really enjoy it or really takes you by surprise, or you're just sitting there with a big smile on your face watching something. You know, what movie do you wish you could see for the first time again? Just kind of get a Men in Black neuralizer, just erase the memory of it, and then go back and watch it for the first time again.
All right, so for this one, I was like, Chris Nolan is my favorite director. I was like, I'd go with the Nolan movie, Interstellar, and then I was like, ooh, Clerks. Clerks changed my life in terms of like filmmaking and stuff. But actually, 2 years ago, they re-released this movie in Dolby theaters, and I went with two of my friends, and one of my friend had never seen this movie before, and I said to her flat out, I said, I wish I had your eyes so I could be watching this movie for the first time ever. And that movie was The Matrix. Because, I remember it came out in 99. I was in ninth grade. I remember we were in homeroom, and my buddy came up to me. He's like, dude, did you see The Matrix? I'm like, I haven't seen it yet. He's like, dude, there's this gnarly scene where like this chick, she just like goes in slow motion at the bullets and everything. And I was like, oh man, it sounds gnarly. And then I actually went and saw it probably, I think, within the next couple of days in theaters. And that was the one, man. Because that was the one. Because literally, yeah, 2 years ago, they really released it in the Dolby, super crisp 4K projection, Dolby Atmos sound and everything. And that was the one I said to her. I was like, I want your eyes so I could see this for the first time.
Yeah, if nothing else, it certainly is a very unique and interesting movie, especially if you don't really have any prior knowledge of it and you're seeing it for the first time, and the story and the visuals and the concept. It's something that, that's definitely a good answer for this question. But for mine, I feel like there's a lot of different ones that I could say, of course, that, movies that really are your favorites. You wish you could see them for the first time again because they really made an impact. But one that just kind of came to my mind when I thought of this question was the movie Gone Girl, directed by David Fincher, because David Fincher, one of my favorite directors. Gone Girl, when I saw it for the first time, it literally had me on the edge of my seat. Just the twists and turns and the very well directed acting and, action going on. So it really took me by surprise, and I didn't really know what to expect. I had not read the book or really had anything spoiled for me when the movie originally came out, when I just saw this movie for the first time a few years ago. So, that was the first answer that really came to my mind when I thought of this question. Is I wish I could go back and see Gone Girl for the first time, because everything that unfolded just was a really just amazing movie, just in terms of direction, in terms of story and the way that it unfolded. So that would definitely be my answer for this question.
Yeah, Gone Girl is a phenomenal. Yeah, David Fincher for me. One of the things we actually agree on in this whole podcast thing is we both love Fincher. And I told, so I did a short film a few years ago. My guy asked me, my DP asked me, it's like, what look do you want? And I said, dude, watch Gone Girl. That's the look I want, because his movies, and Gone Girl in particular, has like this blue tint that really, for my money, is like the best cinematic look
So let's get into our stories from the past week here, moving on. So our first one deals with, you may have heard the story from this week, that Krispy Kreme is offering free donuts, one donut per day for anyone who comes in and shows their COVID vaccination card. So I thought initially hearing about this, it was going to be you go in one time, you show your card, you get one free donut, and that's it. But they're giving people one free donut a day when they come in and show their vaccination card. So you could go in every single day and get a free donut for just being vaccinated. So I think this was a fantastic marketing idea and something that is a win-win for everybody in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's Krispy Kreme trying to do something good to get people vaccinated. And the articles clearly says that the reason they're doing it for the whole year is because people aren't eligible to be vaccinated yet, and they wanted to make sure that that everybody gets in on this deal as soon as they can. Which I was like, that's good on them.
Yeah, at least one person out there is going to get vaccinated because of this, and if that's the case, then they managed to reach at least one person, help them get vaccinated just because they wanted some free donuts, then it was all worth it. So, let's just get right into the movies. I'm sure I might take advantage of this when I get vaccinated, or if you wanted to take advantage of it now, of course. But with movies, when I hear Krispy Kreme, I thought of one particular one because people kind of make fun of it for its product placement with Krispy Kreme, and that is the 2017 Power Rangers movie. Because in the movie, it's an ongoing joke that the MacGuffin of the movie is kind of buried underneath this Krispy Kreme kind of deep in the earth, and they constantly kind of make references and jokes about it. So, I don't know if you had seen the movie when it came out, but yeah, so you did. So what did you think of it? Because I'll get to what I think of it in a second, but I want to hear your opinion first.
Well, I grew up on Power Rangers when I was a kid, dude. I was the tool who came home from school and put on the show as soon as I got home, and I absolutely love the original movie, the one from '95. I enjoyed this one, honestly. I thought it was good. It just, in terms of, it was trying to be a more down to earth Power Ranger movie, like Nolan started that whole trend with Batman, making the movies more grounded and down to earth. And I enjoyed it. I like the tease at the end as well, but I don't know if we'll ever actually see that sequel.
No, unfortunately, the direction that they're going in with this franchise, they are going to kind of reboot it with different actors and a different premise in the future. Unfortunately, because I liked it too when it came out. I saw it in theaters, and I was also a big Power Rangers fan when I was a kid. I used to watch the show all the time on TV when I got home from school or before school in the mornings. And, it's a shame because I thought the young cast was really good in this. You've definitely seen them in other things now since then or before that. But it's a shame because I felt like it got the balance right between campiness and seriousness. It made you feel for the characters. It had some good action. It was a good idea, a good concept to modernize the franchise. And it's a shame that we won't get to see a proper sequel to it because I think it got a lot of unnecessary flack when it came out. And I would have looked forward to a sequel featuring these characters and this story and this look and feel to the franchise going forward.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, you had Elizabeth Banks in it, who was Rita, I believe. She was Rita Repulsa, I believe is her name, and that was funny seeing her doing that versus the '95 version, and Bill Hader, I think, was Alpha 5, and I love Bill Hader. I'm a huge Bill Hader fan, so anything Bill Hader's in, I love. But I mean, yeah, you hit the nail on the head, man. It was a solid effort that unfortunately didn't do well theatrically, and that's that.
Looking at the box office numbers for this, when I picked it for this week, it really didn't seem that disappointing. But then again, studios are disappointed when a movie doesn't make $1 billion these days. They consider it a failure. So honestly, it didn't really look like a failure on paper to me financially. It had made back its money and then some. I think they say you have to double your money to be even considered a success at the box office, which off the top of my head, I believe this movie did. But again, maybe it wasn't as much as they were hoping for, which again is a shame that they just looked probably at the facts and figures and gave it a thumbs down for whether they were going to continue in this direction. So unfortunately, that's the case, but that's the world we live in. So what did you pick related to this Krispy Kreme donut story?
All right. So with donuts, I think I went as simple as you could, man. I went with the Simpsons movie. Homer loves donuts. I mean, what more could that's about as simple as you could. I think the disc that the movie is on is an actual donut too. I should have pulled it out. I didn't think about it, but yeah, I think the disc is a donut. But come on, man, donuts. It's like the Simpsons tagline.
So this is then a theme with both movies that we kind of picked out relating to the story, because I feel like the Simpsons movie is another one that maybe got some unnecessary flack when it came out, that it wasn't received as well as people thought it would be, that audiences didn't really go to see it in droves, and that it kind of canceled ideas because of the way it performed for any possible sequels in the future. So, what did you think when you first saw this movie?
I thought it was a hit. I didn't think it underperformed. Maybe it did. I thought it was a hit. I think I know that they say when it comes to like doing their animation and their movies and stuff, it takes them like 10 years it could take them to animate something like that. And I love the movie. I think it's hilarious. You got Spider Pig, and you got there's the one shot in the beginning where Bart's on his skateboard and he has his little wiener out and he's skating by the window, which you could only get away with in the movie, which was hilarious. You got Albert Brooks is in it. Tom Hanks has a cameo, a bubble. I thought in terms of like going theatrical, man, for me, it didn't disappoint. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I didn't think it was too bad either. And I will say I don't really watch the show too much. Of course, I've seen episodes here and there, and people always argue about where the quality kind of went down as the show went on. But I felt like the movie was pretty good. It was pretty funny. It definitely had some good production value to it, being a movie versus the show. It definitely looked a lot cleaner. It was a different animation. They were able to do some bigger things, some 3D animation mixed in there as well that looked pretty good with the show's style. So I think this movie was pretty good. I felt like it was a solid comedy, and for fans of the show, I really hope they liked it. But obviously, we never really got a sequel to it, so we're just kind of left with continuing to watch the show.
I think we're going to get a sequel. I think Matt Groening always gets asked about a sequel, and he says that eventually they're going to get to one. So one day we will see a Simpsons sequel.
You got to think they might. If the show just keeps running, that eventually they're going to make another movie, almost kind of as a side effect, where if the show still is garnering enough viewers that it keeps going and going, that we'll probably get another movie. But as far as I know, I'm not sure if one's in production right now.
All right, so my first story of the week is my triumphant return to space stories that I absolutely love. And this story is, so it was one I originally saw on Colbert because he mentioned it in his Meanwhile segment. And it's just about space right now is full of space junk, which is just destroyed satellites and all that stuff that has been left up in space, since the space program began in the 60s or whatever. And it's becoming more and more dangerous. They say, like in the article, they specifically mention that they have over 100,000 pieces in space of things that are the size of like sand granules, but they're traveling at like 18,000 miles per hour. And if that were to hit, an astronaut doing a spacewalk or even, a spaceship or something, the damage could be a calamity.
No, that I don't know. Catastrophic. I think that's maybe the word.
Catastrophic.
Yeah,
that's the one.
So yeah, this is something you never really think about, where this debris that's kind of lingering up there and keeps circling the Earth. It's not something you really think about when you hear about space exploration and all that kind of stuff, where we continue to go out and explore. We got to clean up the garbage that's essentially left behind in orbit and above our planet and in space in our vicinity. So, this was something that, of course, makes sense when you hear about it, but it's not something necessarily a lot of people think about when you mention these types of stories and space exploration. So I feel like maybe we definitely had the same movie related to this story on this one, because there's a very clear movie that deals with this type of problem that jumpstarts the conflict.
I know exactly what movie you picked. I knew what movie you were going to pick from the moment I sent this article, but we do not have the same movie, I guarantee it.
Come on, I know you know that I know what movie it was, so we definitely could have picked the same one and talked about it, equally. We both really liked it. So of course, with that being said, my movie related to the story is Gravity, because if you had seen the movie, you know that the conflict essentially starts when NASA tries to do something like this. They try to clear an old satellite, space station, space junk, whatever it may be, and then it starts a chain reaction where the debris starts wrecking the crew that's up there station, and really causes Sandra Bullock to try to scramble to get back to Earth safely. So, fantastic movie, great direction. The visuals are off the charts. I'm so glad I saw this in theaters when it came out, and in 3D no less. This is a great movie to just go back and watch, where it's a pretty simple story, but the way that they tell it and the way that it's shown is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's Alfonso Cuarón who directed it, and you're 100% right, dude. In terms of 3D use, it's one of the better 3D movies out there, and it's a simple story, exactly. But man, when Sandra Bullock should have won the Oscar that year. That's the year she lost to Kate Blanchett for Blue Jasmine, a Woody Allen movie. And I enjoyed Blue Jasmine, but I think Sandra Bullock got robbed of a second Oscar that year. She deserved it, man. Her performance in that it's phenomenal, man. It's singular. It is her. Gravity is a phenomenal movie because of Sandra Bullock's performance in the movie. And
would you say
she was robbed?
Would you say it's almost like Tom Hanks in Castaway, where the person in the movie is stranded and they kind of have to drive the movie themselves? They have to be the focal point. They have to still keep it interesting. They can't just not talk. They can't just walk around and not say anything to the audience. So does this kind of remind you of Castaway, where the actor kind of had to almost carry the movie on their shoulders and keep audiences engaged?
Yeah, it does, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, that's two of the greatest actors ever. Tom Hanks, Sandra Bullock that's, if you're going to anchor a movie with somebody, those would be who you go with, really, because you'd watch them in anything. Even, I mean, they did collaborate on one of the most depressing movies ever made, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. But even if it's the most depressing movie ever made, and one of them, it's still, you watch it because they're both great. And Max von Sydow.
So would you also say, despite everything Gravity has going for it, that it's a very human story? Because again, it's about Sandra Bullock's goal to get back to Earth safely, to keep living, and there are elements to her character that you find out throughout the movie. So would you say Gravity is also, despite its sci-fi background, is a very human story that's being told?
Yeah. I mean, I think any movie has to have that human element, or you're not going to relate to it that much. But the other things I'll say about Gravity, because I think I did, the score. I remember as soon as I left the theater, I ordered the score like right away because the score is phenomenal. And tidbit, you may know this, but the person who plays Mission Control in the movie, the voice that you hear throughout the movie, is Ed Harris.
Yeah, the score is absolutely fantastic, and there are other actors in this movie as well, of course, but they play very small roles because it is centered around Sandra Bullock's character. So I'm still a little disappointed you didn't pick Gravity as well, but I want to hear what you picked relating to this story.
I mean, I went with when I read the story, when I heard this story, there was one scene from one movie that instantly went through my head, and that was when the spaceship transforms into a maid with a vacuum from Spaceballs. Mel Brooks' Spaceballs. That was like, immediately, that was the image I had run through my brain, which was a big spaceship with a vacuum, and they're just vacuuming up space.
Yeah, Spaceballs is a classic. I'll give you that. I'm still disappointed you didn't pick Gravity because it so perfectly fits this story, but Spaceballs is such a classic comedy, and it hits even harder with the laughs if you've seen Star Wars. You don't necessarily have to see Star Wars to get this movie for it to be funny, but it certainly helps because it's a lot of what it's kind of mocking and poking fun of. But I definitely love Spaceballs. It's a classic comedy you can go back and watch anytime, and it still holds up today.
I mean, that was my introduction to Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks is a person I count as one of my idols in life. I have a couple, and he is one of them. And Spaceballs was my intro to him, and it's just it really is kind of a perfect comedy. It's a smart ass comedy, which is Mel Brooks' bread and butter. It's the merchandising scene where he plays yogurt, making fun of Yoda, and it's Spaceballs, the mug, Spaceballs, the T-shirt, which I actually have a Spaceballs, the T-shirt shirt, and it's a perfect parody. Like, I don't think there is a better parody. I rank it above Naked Guns. I rank it as the best parody movie ever made.
Yeah, it's almost maybe a little bit ahead of its time with the self-aware humor, with the meta commentary on the merchandising and the scene where they're watching themselves in the movie on the monitor. It's almost kind of self-aware and ahead of its time with that kind of humor, the self-referential humor where you see maybe a little bit later that other movies kind of do that they poke fun of themselves while they're making the movie, while the movie's going on. So this was maybe a little bit ahead of its time with some of the humor like that, but you're right. It's very witty. It's very sarcastic. It's very, dialogue humor, related humor. So I think it definitely is still pretty sharp with what it says and the jokes that it puts out there. Another story you may have seen from this past week that was taking the internet by storm is a man who found shrimp tails in his box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And while that was bizarre enough, the story gained more traction when he posted the response that General Mills gave him, among other things, besides just sending him a free box to try to remedy this situation. They posted that it has actually been just granulated and sugar that just kind of came together to form that shape, that they weren't shrimp tails at all. And that just it was like pouring gasoline on the fire. It fueled attention to this story, and it fueled the man's determination to follow through and really put them in the spotlight and put them on the spot with this. So, this is not the thing you want in your breakfast cereal in the morning.
No, but the story took an even bigger turn since then, and that is the fact that this guy who was unlucky in getting shrimp tails and possibly rat feces and his Cinnamon Toast Crunch is also one of the luckiest men to ever live, because he is married to freaking Topanga from Boy Meets World. He's married to Danielle Fishel. If you grew up in my age, I don't know if it was your age, we established we have an 8-year difference between us, but Boy Meets World for us was like the show. And Topanga was like the girl you had the biggest, everybody my age had the biggest crush on Topanga. So this guy, yeah, he got some shrimp tails in his Cinnamon Toast Crunch. He won the lottery in terms of like marriage partners, because that's awesome.
Yeah, this was a fun fact that kind of came out while this story was developing because, initially when this story first broke and people were looking at these exchanges between this guy and General Mills about this box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch and the shrimp tails that were found in it, and then it came out a day or two later that he was married to Danielle Fishel, of all people, and it kind of threw people for a loop. And they said, what? He's really, wow, good for him. And also, it was just surprising to hear that this man related to this story was just in such a big marriage with this person. And maybe because he didn't throw it out at first, he didn't mention it. But yeah, if you were a 90s kid, Topanga was maybe one of your crushes. But it's just a lesson, I think, going forward about how not to handle a situation with customer dissatisfaction if you're a company, by trying to say, no, those aren't shrimp tails. They're just concentrations of cinnamon sugar that just formed into that shape. So this might be another story where we may have picked the same movie because, again, I feel like there's a pretty obvious choice relating to this, and I see you shaking your head, but I'll just throw out my movie first. Of course, shrimp tails, shrimp, Forrest Gump. how could you not, kind of think of that movie when you pick the story, the shrimp, and it just whenever you think shrimp, that's the first movie that I think of. So Forrest Gump, fantastic movie. I saw this for the first time in college, and I remember at the time my friend wanted me to watch it, and I had heard of Forrest Gump, but I didn't really know what the movie was about. So I asked him to describe it to me, and he simply says, "Well, it's just a movie about a guy who just lives his life and things happen over that period of time." And I thought, wow, that sounds like a terrible premise, but it's, of course, an amazing movie. So I think that pretty much sums up the plot of the movie, though. It's just simply a man living his life throughout the decades, and significant historical events happen, and he goes through different adventures. So I'm sure, being a Tom Hanks fan, that you really like this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Forrest Gump. Yeah, Forrest Gump. It's just about how one guy happened upon every major event from the 60s and 70s, and how he was involved in all these just crazy events, worldwide events and everything. And yeah, I absolutely love Forrest Gump. I recently watched it again. I did like, when quarantine started, I did a whole Tom Hanks marathon and watched Forrest Gump, and it's a phenomenal movie. I mean, for me, it was the year it won Best Picture in '94, and it was up against Shawshank. Right? That's a Rosemary's Baby, or not a Rosemary? Yeah, Rose. It's a. How do you pick which one?
I think what you're thinking of is Sophie's Choice.
Wow, I'm not doing good today. Yes, Sophie's Choice is exactly what I was thinking of, and yeah. So it was like a Sophie's Choice between, man, which one do you pick? I think in terms of which one has had the staying power, Shawshank, but Forrest Gump, man, it's a great movie. Great soundtrack. I love this. I love 50s, 60s, 70s music. So that soundtrack for me is one of the best ever produced. And Tom Hanks rightfully won the Oscar for it. I think he was phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that's definitely up for debate about which is the better movie, Shawshank Redemption or Forrest Gump. And as I've said before on the show, I haven't quite seen Shawshank Redemption yet. I will one day, of course, but it's going to come down to personal preference, because I think there are two very amazing movies that have stood the test of time, that were rightly nominated for Academy Awards, and that people praise even to this day, that people love still watching and dissecting. So, I think it's a debate about which is the better movie for the 1994 Academy Award for Best Picture, Forrest Gump or Shawshank Redemption. So let's hear what you pick for this, because I'm interested to hear what you may have related to this now.
I'll button that with both of those don't matter. Pulp Fiction was also for Best Picture that year. That should have won. But the movie I picked would be one I'm going to venture you've never heard of it. But for this story, it's really the only story you could pick, or the only movie. It's called The Road to Wellville, and it's a movie about John Kellogg. And John Kellogg, and it's Anthony Hopkins plays him, and basically it's a comedy. It's like one of those weird comedy movies. Came out in '94. I actually watched it last night because I hadn't seen it in probably 20 some years. And it's a weird movie about, basically, John Kellogg was a huge proponent of clean living and weird health things and everything. And so he ran a sanitarium in Michigan where people would go to get healthy and everything. And he was a vegetarian, and he preached, all this stuff, but he would also just do, he was a proponent of eugenics and stuff, which I don't know if you know what eugenics are, but eugenics is basically it's racism and classism and all that stuff about purifying bloodlines for going forward. And so it's watching this movie, and they don't really go into the eugenics thing. It was only when I did my kind of research after I watched it, which was like, if Kellogg was around today, or people actually delved into who Kellogg was as a human being, in cancel culture world we live in now, people would never buy Kellogg cereal ever again, because that guy was into some really weird stuff.
So I think it's interesting that related to this story, I kind of picked a movie related to the shrimp end of it, and you picked a movie related to the cereal part of this story. You know, you had the two different items that this guy had in his bowl, and I took the shrimp and went with that, and you took the cereal and went with a movie related to that. So, you know, would you kind of put this up there in terms of quality with some other movies, historical dramas, kind of based on real life? Where would you kind of rank this among some of the others or determine its quality?
Um, it's low. It's not a bad movie. Normally, if I come up with a movie that you haven't seen, I'll say, dude, put it on your pile. You got to watch it. You can skip The Road to Wellville. I enjoyed it. Anthony Hopkins is one of my favorite actors of all time. I absolutely love the guy. We'll discuss The Father in our Oscar show. One of the best performances I've ever seen. But it's got Hopkins, it's got Dana Carvey, Matthew Broderick, John Cusack. I mean, it's got a Bridget Fonda. It's got a stacked cast, man, and it's one of those movies when you're watching it, you're just like, this is weird. It's a weird movie, and I appreciated it. I appreciate that type. It's not a run of the mill story. It takes place in the 1900s, obviously, and it's funny, but it's dark funny. Like, you know, some of the comedy derives from people's deaths, which is when it's handled right, it's funny. And this movie does handle it in a funny way and everything. But it's a weird movie. But for a story about cereal, dude, it was the only movie I could think of.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Everyone has their list of movies that they want to see or need to see in their lifetime. And hearing about the premise for this one and never hearing of it before, it just, I got to be honest, before you even said you could skip this one, that it didn't really seem like it would really make my priority list for watching it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think with that we can move on. All right. So the next story coming up I picked was basically this past week in movie news was a couple of big name movies got announced as they're going to be going to streaming, and so I picked these articles mainly to discuss where we are in terms of movie going. You know, you got Black Widow and Cruella from Disney are going to be going theatrical, but also onto their Disney Plus for the additional $30 fee, which, according to a report I read yesterday, has not been super successful for them. Apparently, Raya, their last movie they did this with, was not a success streaming wise. And then the other one was The Mitchells versus the Machines, which was the new Phil Lord. I forget the other guy's name, but the guys who did 21 Jump Street, and then they produced the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, and it was originally called Connected, but now that movie's going directly to Netflix, skipping theatrical. And so it was just, I picked these stories, man, because I don't want the theatrical model to die. I enjoy going to the movies. I don't want movies to go to streaming all the time. I want to see a movie in the theaters.
Yeah, no, I'm a believer that in 2022, I think we'll see the return of the theatrical release model, if not maybe a little bit later this year, once more people have been vaccinated, once theaters can have more capacity, once things are a little bit more open. That I think right now, this is just what people are trying to do to attract people to their streaming sites and their services and to try and be at the forefront of capturing the most viewers to try to come up with innovative ways to get people to watch their content. So obviously all the different streaming services are doing something different. And, you know, I just like to point out that Disney, for all their bluster and saying all this time that Black Widow was going to be a theatrical release and it deserves to be on the big screen, that at the end of the day, they went back on what they said and they're going to release it for $30 on Disney Plus, and it will be in theaters too. But it's just funny how the pandemic has kind of caused them to reevaluate and say, you know what, we can't keep delaying this. It's maybe losing interest. Other people that are hardcore fans, they really want to see it. So let's just bite the bullet. Let's get it out there for people to see.
That's kind of how I wrote it down too. It was like, they could have delayed it another year, but at that point you're delaying a movie 2 years. Does that lose momentum in terms of it? I don't know if a Marvel movie is capable of losing momentum, or do they get it out this year for people to see? I know there are people who prefer, you know, $30 to rent it for a family of 5 or 6 or whatever is actually a bargain price. for me, I'm not paying $30 just to watch, one movie. I'll either go see it in theaters or wait for it to hit, Blu-ray and buy it. I
Yeah,
also wrote down. Sorry.
I think that I think that maybe the $30 price tag would maybe be worth it if you had a party of people that kind of came over to your house to see it, and you kind of split the cost with a few different people. Because but you can't really do that right now because most people are in ones and twos in their homes, and they're staying isolated and they're staying safe. So you're pretty much almost as an individual eating that $30 price tag for one movie to watch at home.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and then as much as I decree or decry, however you pronounce it, the theatrical experience or whatever. In all honesty, in the past week or 2 weeks, even last week, we discussed Avatar in China and New York theaters and LA theaters last week opened, and they had Tenet was released finally in these two cities in their IMAX, and there were reports that every showing was sold out. And so it's still, these stories are coming out where, the theatrical people are clamoring to get back to theaters. And I think these are kind of showing that when the world gets to a point where we can hit theaters again, the audience will be there.
I definitely think so. I am optimistic, and I certainly hope that we're not done with the theatrical release model forever, that movie theaters will still be around later this year or next year, whenever we kind of get back to maybe having some bigger capacity crowds to be able to see movies on the big screen. So, let's hear what movie you kind of picked related to this. Obviously, you could go in a couple different directions, but I'm interested to hear kind of what you picked relating to the story in terms of a movie.
So with this story, I went with, HBO has been doing their HBO Max, or Warner Brothers, sorry, has been doing their HBO Max simultaneous with theatrical. And they did it with, Judas and the Black Messiah. They did it with The Little Things. And so I actually picked Tom and Jerry, the new Tom and Jerry movie, because this has actually shown a pretty successful split, where the movie has pulled in $77 million worldwide, and it premiered on both. So it kind of shows that people will go to the theater if they want to go see a movie. And the Tom and Jerry, I watched it. I thought it was a great kids movie. Wasn't my favorite movie. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was nice to just kick back and watch a dumb kids movie, for a couple hours. And I like Chloe Grace Moretz and Michael Pena, who's in it. But it was, it's nice to see that it's pulling in money theatrically when you can watch it on streaming.
I will say, starting off, that Warner Brothers has no plans to carry this model into next year, where they do the simultaneous release on HBO Max as well as in theaters. And we'll see if they keep their word on that, or what happens with, again, the theatrical experience going forward. But Tom and Jerry, I saw this movie, and of course I do have HBO Max, but honestly, I didn't really have any interest in seeing it, because you've kind of confirmed what I thought about it, was that it wasn't quite as good as the original cartoons, which I grew up watching, and I thought were really good. And this, again, like kind of what you said, it looked like a good kids movie, but not a great movie overall. And I don't know where maybe that wasn't a thing anymore, where we stopped making kids movies that kids would want to go see and would want to watch, but have a little bit of depth to them instead of just cartoony antics. And maybe this is the same conversation that people always have, where they say they don't make them like they used to. But again, I just feel like growing up in the 90s, when you were watching Disney Renaissance movies that, yes, at their heart, they were kids movies, but they also didn't talk down to kids, and they still taught them important lessons, and they still were able to take things away from those movies that we watched when we were kids.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you did see it or didn't see it?
Did not. I did not have much
Okay.
interest in watching this new Tom and Jerry movie.
Right on. And another note I wrote with this was, like, yeah, like you said, HBO and Warner are doing this just for 2021, as they say. But there are movies that are going to be released in this model, like Matrix 4, The Suicide Squad, where even if I can watch them on my HBO Max, I probably am still going to go to the theater to see it. I want to see Matrix 4 on a huge screen.
It's all about personal preference and what you feel safe doing these days, especially because a lot of things are just day to day about what happens, what unfolds, what the latest development is, what is open, at what capacity. So it's tough. And look, I would really love to see a lot of these on the big screen as well. The ones that I'm interested in, or I think deserve to be seen on a big screen instead of your 30 something inch TV at home. But it's just a matter of personal preference of what you feel safe doing these days for yourself and for others.
Are you still watching TV on a 30-inch TV, man? Come on, get with the times. But what's your film, sir?
So for this one, because the Black Widow movie is, of course, the biggest kind of movie of note in this story about getting the streaming and theatrical release, I picked a movie relating to Black Widow more, and that's the movie Lucy, which Scarlett Johansson starred in, and it's almost kind of like a superhero movie. It's like a sci-fi superhero movie. That's not what it wanted to be. It just kind of seemed that way watching it. And this one, when I saw it in theaters, it was okay. It started off really well, and it had an interesting premise. It's like Limitless, where it kind of takes the approach of the unused part of our brains and kind of branches off of that. But then by the end of the movie, it just kind of goes off the rails and gets a little silly. But it's a decent movie overall, I think. A decent sci-fi action movie.
I actually love the ending. I liked where the story went. I liked that it went off the rails, man. And I think, yeah, this was kind of one of her first starring roles after you saw her in Black Widow. So it was like her first, I think, I could be making that up. It was like her first big like lead action, Scarlett Johansson can kick ass type of movie. And I love it. It's a Luc Besson movie who is a phenomenal filmmaker, I think, for the most part. He's done some duds, but I enjoy Luc Besson.
Yeah, at least we can both agree that it kind of went off the rails a little bit towards the end. I just thought the concept, and it seemed to fit the beginning of the movie where she's able to process things faster and she's able to do different things because she's has parts of her brain unlocked. But the stuff that she's able to do later in the movie, it just seemed kind of silly to me. And I thought, okay, I don't have a problem with you going in this direction, but where we started and the premise and how we got here, I just don't think you're really there. You always have to have a sense of movie logic and just take things for granted when you're watching a movie. But it was kind of stretching the imagination and kind of saying, well, I don't really think you can really get to point B when we started at point A.
Right on. Yeah, agree to disagree on that aspect of it, but it still sounds like you enjoyed it. It just went a little too far for you.
Yeah, essentially, the suspension of disbelief was just kind of stretched to its limits for me on this one. But at the end of the day, it was still a competently made movie, and it still had good visuals and good action and a pretty good acting job from Scarlett Johansson. So if I had to say yay or nay recommending this to someone, I should say sure. Check it out, make an opinion for yourself. It's a decent enough movie.
I enjoyed it a little bit more than you, but it is a good movie. Check it out.
So this past week, obviously, there have been some stories related to follow-up from the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And Variety did an interview with Ann Sarnoff, who I believe is the CEO of Warner Brothers. And she kind of covered some topics related to the movie and some other projects kind of in the pipeline on the future. But the thing that jumped out to people the most relating to this story was that when asked if, because of the popularity of Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max, if there would be a continuation of the Snyderverse, as people call it, this shared universe that branches off of the movie, if there would be more projects coming up relating to it. And she answered that with a flat no, that it was over and that they were moving on. And people didn't react too kindly to that, and I kind of agree with them on this.
I agree with them in as much as even when I finished watching Snyder's Justice League last week, I kind of figured this was going to be a one and done, even if it was super successful, you got the sense it was a one and done. And with that, I wish Snyder would have just taken the $70 million in reshoots plus his already shot footage and given us a closed ending instead of a cliffhanger for future movies that more than likely, even if you thought perhaps maybe possibly hold out hope there will be more, they'll greenlight another Justice League movie, you have to, common sense, I feel, for me at least, kind of had to kick in and say, this is a once in a lifetime thing for him to get to go back and do this movie. It's probably not going to result in more movies. Let's just close the loop. Let's give a complete movie.
Ordinarily, I'd agree with you, but again, the saga of this movie being made, and if you would have asked me a year or two ago if we would have ever seen daylight, I would have told you absolutely no. So I certainly think there's still a possibility that they could continue his original, I think it's a 4 or 5 movie plan, and obviously a couple of those movies have already come out. So people are kind of saying that, look, we don't want Zack Snyder to make movies forever. We just want him to be able to finish his original story, his 4 or 5 movie, whatever it is, arc that he originally planned, that it seems like Warner Brothers at every turn has been trying to shut him down on. So the latest development with this kind of situation is that supposedly HBO Max is interested in continuing and maybe doing some more of these Snyderverse movies with these characters, but that Warner Brothers itself isn't. So it's still ongoing, and obviously we still have yet to see a definitive answer about whether we're going to see additional signs of life for this movie franchise. But I say, given the fact that this movie exists, Zack Snyder's Justice League, that anything's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible. I'll go on record and say I do not believe we will ever see any more Snyder DC extended movies. Because, even before this 4-hour cut came out, I had read a story that apparently the Warner Brothers execs weren't happy with the movie, which obviously after we've seen it, it was a good movie. And even, Batman versus Superman, his extended cut was a better movie. So it'd be nice, but I think at a certain point, you kind of got to just cut the cord. And I think that's where Warner Brothers is at right now. We let you do this. We did it as a big promotion for HBO Max. It worked. Let's go our separate ways.
Well, I will just close this out by saying that I think people are right when they say that, look, the numbers are huge for viewers for Zack Snyder's Justice League, and a lot of people are calling for a continuation of it. And to not really acknowledge that on Warner Brothers' part, and to just say flat no, we're not even going to entertain this notion, we're moving on, is just, again, kind of like relating back to the General Mills story, just maybe not how you deal with your customers in the right way. So, yes, yeah.
Because I did want to jump in on that. So they did release numbers for the first week or whatever, and they were behind Wonder Woman 84. So it wasn't like everybody watched. It was the behemoth of all behemoths for HBO Max, because the numbers were still behind Wonder Woman.
And I will say, again, playing devil's advocate with that, it may be because Wonder Woman 84 was kind of one of the earlier release model movies for this kind of HBO Max dual streaming and theatrical release, and that since it was released around Christmas time, maybe more people were at home watching this. So that's just speculation on my part about why the numbers might be stilted one direction or why they might not be. So, just talking about movies relating to this, obviously Zack Snyder's Justice League. We've talked at length about it before last week. Last week's episode, we talked for quite a while about the movie, so we won't exhaust it too much more about the movie itself because we covered it in length on our previous episode if you wanted to check that out. But I think because we covered a lot of the other DC movies that kind of came before this or right after this in the timeline with Justice League, that just briefly talk about the movie that I picked relating to this, which is Aquaman, starring obviously Jason Momoa, who plays Arthur Curry, Aquaman. You see his character in Justice League and obviously in this movie, Aquaman. So, what did you think of this one? Because I thought it was a good balance of different tones and different genres that it threw a lot of stuff at the wall, but it was a great kind of action adventure movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll just get it out there. My pick was Snyder's Justice League. We discussed it. Don't need to discuss it anymore. But Aquaman, I enjoyed Aquaman. I'm a huge James Wan fan. I love James Wan. I remember seeing Saw for the first time in theaters. I got to see an advanced screening of it, and that movie, in terms of horror movies, changed what I thought endings could be. And so, and then Wan has built up a reputation to being this massive, phenomenal horror director with the Conjuring universe and everything. And then he took on Furious 7 or Fast and the Furious 7, and then he got Aquaman, and I thought Aquaman was really good, man. I thought it had a phenomenal supporting cast. You have Nicole Kidman, you have Willem Dafoe, you got Amber Heard, who I've worked with before, never backed down. She was fine. She was nice. But it's a good action movie. It's a good comic book movie. I'm not a comic book reader. Don't follow any of that stuff. So if they could have veered from comic book reality, and I wouldn't know. But it's good.
Yeah, James Wan is certainly a talented filmmaker, and like you kind of said, he has worked in these different genres. So, regardless of what your movie tastes are, whether you like horror movies, don't like them, action movies, don't like them, odds are you've seen something that he's been involved with. So, honestly, I can't wait to see what he does next because he's been involved with the Conjuring franchise, which I'm a fan of. I think it's one of the better horror franchises out there these days. And with Aquaman, I think it's a very good technical achievement too to depict all these underwater scenes because you're thinking how do they make these underwater scenes work going into the movie without seeing any footage yet? How do they film entirely underwater? And obviously, a lot of green screen, a lot of visual effects are involved, but I think they did a really good job of depicting this underwater city and people talking and the action and all that kind of stuff that takes place entirely underwater.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and I guess there was a difference in the Justice League versus Wan's Aquaman in terms of I only read this, so I didn't actually notice it. But I guess the way they talked in the air bubbles, and apparently Amber Heard or Mira had a British accent in Snyder's Justice League, but no British accent in Aquaman. So those differences between the takes on the material.
I think it's just chalk it up to one of those things where the continuation of different things from the 2017 Justice League to Aquaman, which came out in 2018, back to Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was filmed mostly years ago, but has now been refilmed in certain parts and just came out this year. So it's a little messy in terms of continuation and continuity, but I think for the most part, it still does a good job in hindsight, Zack Snyder's Justice League, of setting up this Aquaman movie. So I liked it. I'll be interested to see where they go with the sequel and what James Wan is involved with that as well.
Yeah, and to touch on James Wan, he is going back to the horror movie genre. 2021, he has a new movie called *Malignant* coming out, which is a horror movie, and he's a producer on a movie I'm sure we'll be discussing in a couple weeks, *Mortal Kombat*. All right, so my next story is one of my favorite artists, Rob Zombie. He scored his first ever Billboard #1 album this week with the Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy, which was his newest album that just came out last week, obviously. And for me, I mean, I pre-ordered this album the second I heard it was announced. The first song off of it was, I loved it. I love Rob Zombie. I'm a huge Rob Zombie fan. I've seen him in concert several times. And actually, he was one of the last people I saw in concert before the pandemic hit. And the funny story about that was, I believe that concert was a Tuesday. It was a Rob Zombie concert with Marilyn Manson on a Tuesday. And then that Friday, I saw Backstreet Boys in concert, which I believe you have a connection to, as I believe your girlfriend was at that same concert.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there, but I will say that I don't mind Rob Zombie's music either. I wouldn't say maybe I love his music quite as much as you, but I definitely still have some of his music on my iPod and I rock out to him in the car or something. But, concerts, I can't even tell you the last one I went to. Obviously, it's been a while since we've been able to have concerts, and still might be a while too, but with Rob Zombie relating to this article and relating to this show, obviously he's done a fair amount of movies as well. And I feel like his style, his movies that he has done, have been very polarizing. You either love them or hate them, and you're either a big fan or you don't really like what he stands for movie wise at all. So, it's interesting to kind of look at some of these and dissect them a little bit, and do they stand for something deeper, and where does he go with the characterization of some of these people? And honestly, I think his movies could be a good study if you go back and kind of look at different things that he's done and what he's trying to say in some of his movies.
Yeah, I love zombie movies, and I remember the first teaser trailer for House of a Thousand Corpses was released. That was originally a Universal flick, and then they dumped it. I guess it was too violent for them or whatever. So it took over a year for that movie to actually hit theaters. And I remember seeing that in theaters, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, I don't think anybody writes hillbilly material the way Rob Zombie does.
So obviously, he's had a pretty good sized catalog of movies to pick from relating to this story. Him, where the story is him as a musician, but obviously he's been a director. So segueing smoothly into that, what did you pick as your Rob Zombie movie relating to this story where he debuted at #1 on the billboards?
Well, I went with The Devil's Rejects, which is my favorite Rob Zombie movie. And to kind of relate that back to concert going was I actually saw the first time I ever saw Rob Zombie in concert was at Ozfest. And it was the Sunday after Devil's Rejects was released theatrically. And he came out on stage, and apparently he had just got the box office numbers, and he was ecstatic for the fact that in the first weekend that movie pulled back its entire production budget. And it was just fun seeing him. It was obvious he just got the news right before he took the stage, and it was fun just seeing how over the moon he was that his movie actually did well theatrically, pulled back its budget, and the dude's hilarious. I don't know if you've ever seen him in concert, or ever seen footage of him or anything, but dude's hilarious in concert. And so, in terms of Devil's Rejects, we actually touched on it a little bit last week, where your music pick was Freebird. And I had said that when I hear that song, I think of The Devil's Rejects, which is kind of probably what was going through my head when I picked this movie, because that ending scene of Devil's Rejects is one of my favorite scenes ever. It is such an awesome scene.
And that's fair. Maybe one day I'll go back and I'll watch this trilogy that he made of these characters, where The Devil's Rejects is the middle one of the trilogy. But I'll be honest, like I said before, it seems like people are really polarized with his movies. They either love them or hate them because of what goes on in them. But I feel like I'm going to contradict that by saying I like some of his movies, I don't like some of his movies. So maybe one day I'll kind of go back and look at more of his catalog and maybe have some different opinions, or look at ones I haven't seen yet and say, wow, I like this one a lot better than some of the other ones that he's done. So maybe one day I'll go back and I'll watch The Devil's Rejects, or maybe that whole trilogy, and kind of make an assessment about what the movies kind of stood for, or if they were good, or I liked them, or just anything like that.
They're sick. I mean, if you're going to watch them, know that they're pretty sick movies, and the people in the Firefly family are sick people, and you gotta know that going in, and you may enjoy, you may not. So knowing your like dislike with him and his films, what's your pick?
So obviously, I picked a movie that was a little bit more popular with mainstream audiences in terms of movies directed by Rob Zombie, and that is the 2007 Halloween movie that he directed. And this one is tricky because it has some good things going for it, and then people criticize it because they say it was just kind of a more brutal remake of the original, which I really like. I really like the 1978 original Halloween, but I think this movie has some good things going for it. I like the modern setting to this story. I like the fact that it kind of is an update where if you had a serial killer like Michael Myers in present day, he wouldn't be as quite tame, quote unquote, as he was with the killings in 1978. So it just this one is interesting to me. I think it's an interesting character study. I think it's interesting comparing it to the original. I don't think it's a perfect movie by any means. I think it probably could have cut some things out that it didn't really need in there, but overall, I'd say it was interesting to watch for sure.
I liked it. The only thing I really took away from that Halloween was, as much as I love Rob Zombie, he is not the best writer of teenage girl dialogue. That dialogue in that movie for me was like, it was like, that was written by a guy in his 40s. But in terms of horror, in terms of the killings, in terms of like what you watch these movies for, I thought it was pretty good.
I will say I do agree with you on that. Some of the writing I feel like could have been a lot better, but I do like the characterization and the depiction of our main character of Michael Myers and his journey from a younger adult to the killer that he is today and some of the things that kind of shape that. I could have used a little less backstory on Michael Myers because part of the terrifying nature of the character is because we don't really know a lot about him. He doesn't speak that much. There's some mystery there because again, you always leave it up to the imagination. It's going to be scarier than what's presented to you. And it's kind of what people argue is the same thing that maybe ruined Darth Vader a little bit is that we learned who he was as a kid, and that kind of takes away some of his ferocity and some of his mystery about his past. So I could have used a little bit less of that in this movie, but I didn't hate every part of it. Wrapping up this week's episode with our movie of the week, I thought it would be a pretty good segue. We talked last week extensively about Zack Snyder's Justice League, and obviously Ben Affleck as Batman was a star in that, so I thought a pretty good segue to this week's movie of the week would be Argo, starring Ben Affleck. And I saw this movie for the first time during the week, and I liked it, and I feel like I learned more and more that there's this hidden subgenre of movies, historical dramas, that I never really knew I liked that much until I started watching more of them and exploring them.
What other movies would be in that category then?
So I've talked about on the podcast a couple of my other favorite ones in that subgenre, these historical dramas, these drama movies that are kind of based off of real life events. And some of them I really like. The Imitation Game, Spotlight, The Founder we've talked about. You know, these movies that I think are just so good, so well acted. They're definitely Academy Award nominated that I never knew there was this whole subgenre of movies that I would like so much until I start watching more and more of them and say, wow, not only do I really like these movies, but hopefully I'm learning a little bit about past historical events as well.
Oh yeah. Those types of movies are high up on my list for like ones I genuinely love. I mean, movies that dramatize past events that you wouldn't really know about. There's another one called Breach. I don't know if you ever saw that about a CIA spy who's a traitor. It could be boring, but it's just the subject matter of these true story movies I find super interesting. And for Argo, you're you're 3 for 3 in your movie of the week picks in terms of like picking movies that I haven't seen in years that I enjoy going back and rewatching. And Argo was definitely one of those. I watched it the other night when you sent over the sheet. And for me, Argo, might be a little, just to me, not interesting. But I joined SAG-AFTRA in 2012, and with that, you get to vote in the awards or whatever. And so Argo actually represents my first ever screener that I got for voting, and so it does have a special place for me in terms of like getting these screeners for the vote in the awards is something I enjoy, and that was the first one I ever got. And
let me cut you off for a second. So just because a lot to unpack, but just getting back to the movie for a second. What did you think about Ben Affleck's performance in this? Because I feel like the more movies that I see him in, the more I realize that he's a pretty versatile actor. That he's been in comedies, he's been in serious dramas like this, he's obviously been in superhero movies. Maybe you kind of noticed this and had some appreciation for Ben Affleck a little bit more than I have in the recent past.
I mean, I love Ben Affleck. Obviously, when it comes to like Kevin Smith movies, the first Kevin Smith movie I actually ever saw was Mallrats, which is Ben Affleck plays the bad guy in that movie, and obviously him and Ben Affleck and Kevin Smith have gone on to make a lot of movies together and stuff, and he does good comedy stuff. Good Will Hunting, as even though a lot of people credit Matt Damon with being he's obviously the lead in that movie. He carries the movie, but Affleck as the best friend in that movie is absolutely phenomenal. And we talked about it earlier today, man. Gone Girl, dude's phenomenal in Gone Girl, man. I mean, he's a great actor. I think sometimes his personal life, unfortunately he has struggled with with alcohol addiction and stuff, and he had some high profile relationships that just it took over what we thought of Ben Affleck, or what people think of Ben Affleck, because that was all they were reading, was him and J-Lo. And it's like, no, just boil it down to the guy won an Oscar for a phenomenal screenplay, and then he went back and won an Oscar for producing Argo.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that Ben Affleck is getting back to a good place these days where he's able to be creative and direct or produce or act in some different movies and really kind of showcase his talent on those different fronts. So I'm glad that he's kind of getting his life together more these days and really getting back to being a great kind of person involved with movies. So getting back to Argo for a second, again, historical drama, a movie based on real life events. But honestly, when this movie came out, like I said, I just watched it for the first time this past week. But when it came out, I had not realized that the movie was actually based on real life events. I thought it was a fictional depiction. So that kind of showed you that maybe I wasn't up to date on my history, that I didn't know that Argo, when it came out, was actually based on real life events.
Yeah. And this movie is actually pretty widely criticized for the real life events. Sorry, you have to the ending of the movie or whatever, the tense ending. The last 30 minutes of that movie, for me, I remember seeing in theaters, is some of the best filmmaking, most tense filmmaking you've ever seen or I've ever seen. It was like you were on your edge of your seat for those last 30 minutes. Are they going to get on the plane? Are they going to blah, 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 And then when you actually go back and read the story, it wasn't tense at all. They got on the plane. There was no chase. There was no any of that stuff. And so it got criticized for that type of stuff. But if they had just shot it as, they got on the plane, it would have been not as great, because that last 30 minutes is so phenomenally done that you have to just be like, I understand why they took these liberties.
And I feel like that's a line that you kind of have to tiptoe when you make a movie like this, a historical drama movie based on real life events. Sometimes you have to movie things up a little bit. You have to maybe not stretch the truth, but just add some different elements in there to make it a captivating movie and to structure it like how a movie needs to be structured. So I get that they maybe added some more exciting elements or some more tense elements to the movie that maybe didn't happen quite the same way in real life. And again, that's always a line you kind of have to tiptoe and figure out what works and what doesn't, and what would be stretching the truth about the real life events that the movie is based on. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that as long as it's done right. And I feel like a lot of these movies, of course, there's a lot of attention to detail that goes into them. And I feel like for the most part, these movies get that balance of facts and things made for the movie correct.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it also, just movie wise, it got criticized for diminishing the Canadians' role in everything. And I watched it again, and after, reading these controversies, I can understand that maybe it was, they didn't like flat out say the Canadians are responsible for most everything. I thought they gave a pretty good acknowledgement to the Canadian government, the Canadian embassy or whatever for what they did. I thought that was well done. I didn't agree with that controversy.
Yeah, and hopefully a side effect about some people listening to this maybe and going to check out some of these movies, especially Argo, is that hopefully after they are done viewing it, that they go back and look up the real life events that it's based on, and they learn a little something, and compare it to what they just saw, and maybe just kind of make that assessment for themselves about what was stretched, what was true, and just they learn a little something by watching the movie and then looking up the real life events and some facts about how things actually happen. So I think it's a win-win getting to watch a good movie like this and then going back and kind of researching these real life events and learning a little bit more history associated with them.
Yeah, I will agree with that. And, I mean, for my money, I think Alan Arkin and John Goodman were the best parts of that movie because they were hilarious. And, it was also famous because Ben Affleck didn't get a director nomination for it, which a lot of people believe is why it won Best Picture, to kind of like say, hey, you messed up, Academy.
Yeah, but now at least we certainly have gotten more of Ben Affleck as a director, and hopefully we'll get some more of as well in the future. So he's one of those filmmakers, like we've talked about earlier in this episode, James Wan and some others on previous episodes, that, again, I can't wait to see what comes next from them. I can't wait to see what Ben Affleck kind of does next in terms of producing, directing, or acting, and we'll see what happens in the future with him. So that wraps up another episode of Life Imitating Movies, a weekly podcast where myself and Brad, we talk about news stories from the past week from across the internet and the movies that we think have already been made that relate to these real life stories. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you're watching, listening, we'll be back again next week, Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern, our usual time. And our movie of the week, spoiler, will be Godzilla vs. Kong, a big new release movie coming out. We haven't had that many, so we'll be enjoying talking about it, what we liked, didn't like. Hopefully you'll check it out. And hopefully we gave you some good recommendations on today's episode. So thank you so much for watching, listening. Brad, anything to add to wrap up this week's episode?
Nah, man. Look forward to next week.
Absolutely. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week. Our big movie of the week, Godzilla vs. Kong. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Hopefully we do too, and we'll see you next week.